Well, good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us for this Continuing Forward webinar on turning around a small church. I am Father Mark Perkins. I am the chaplain at St. Dunstan's Academy in Roseland, Virginia. I'm also a member of the domestic missions team of the Diocese of the Eastern United States in the Anglican Province of America, and I'm the APA's representative on Continuing Forward. This afternoon, I'm going to be interviewing Father Matt Mirabile, who is rector of Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Rochester, New Hampshire. He is also canon missioner of the Diocese of the Northeast in the Anglican Church in America. He is a co-founder of Continuing Forward, and he is the author and director of the Deep Recovery course. The two basic paths towards church growth are church planting and church revitalization. So at Continuing Forward, we think about both of those, and today we're going to be talking about the latter. We're not planning to offer any silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution because those don't exist. Instead, what we're going to offer is a case study of sorts of how one small church revitalized. And we plan for this to be the first in a series of examples of successful revitalization. So rather than trying to come up with one giant picture of how it works, we want to show a bunch of different ways that it has worked and help folks think about how it might work in their context. The format-wise, Father Matt and I will talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll leave the remainder of the hour for question and answer. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into it. So, Father Matt, I was wondering if you could start by telling us when you started at Holy Trinity Rochester and what the state of the parish was like at that time.
So I came to Trinity in April of 2016. I came after a 3-year period of interim vicars and rectors. So the one previous to myself had been there for 1.5 years, and then there were two that were there for short periods of time, and they all came after a period of, a former pastor that had been here for 12 years. And when I got here, Father Faust had done a great job in kind of beginning a reversal and healing and etc. So he got the parish back up to about 38 ASA, average Sunday attendance. And we're currently, our current ASA is 68, 72, something like that. And right now, with the snow outside and it being 17 degrees on Sunday, gets a little cold. But anyway, that's kind of where we stand now.
So as you look over the past then 8 years, roughly, that you've been rector there, what would you say has changed? What have been the major differences in the culture and in the context of the parish?
Oh, gosh. Lots of changes. When I came, I intentionally decided that I was not going to change very much from the outside. Pardon me, because I have one of those chairs that continually sink down. No matter what I do, it just keeps doing that. Yeah, so when I first got here, there were members from the parish that had been here for some time. A couple of them had come back after a break for a couple of years. The average age, I would say, of the parish was about 70-something, 72. So it was definitely an aging parish. And this is, something that I've been talking about widely for some time. I immediately, I knew we had to reverse that and bring down our average age. A case in point, in 2018, I did a burial a month. And so for 13 months, at least that. So that was one of the big changes, right? As coming in and, having basically the same service, and then having a huge turnover of people that I was expecting. And you didn't know how quickly that shoe was going to drop. So one of the first things I realized I had to do was to prepare the parish for growth and try to draw new people while I still had some parishioner energy. because even though we had some folks that were older, there was still, the energy level was high. So, on the low end, we were probably, I was probably one of the youngest people in the parish at that point, at 56. And so I knew that we needed to get new blood in there. And so probably the biggest change was just a more aggressive outreach into the community and to raise our profile in the community, which is one of the goals that they had when they had hired me as well through their search committee.
Yeah, that makes sense. In their search committee, what were they looking for then in their new rector, kind of building on what you were just talking about?
Yeah, so Deacon Mike McKinnon was the junior warden at the time. He wasn't a deacon at that point, but he did an excellent job. He was a corporate executive. I think he understood how to manage something like this. He did a very good job at creating a list of goals or targets that the parish was looking to achieve, and then he quantified those or scored them. So that at the time that they were interviewing prospective clergy, so each clergyman that they were looking at would score 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, based on whatever criteria they had for what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to do things, this parish, this was actually ground zero for the Gene Robinson affair, right here. This parish is made from people who came from that church in 2 waves. And, the first wave was years ago when the Continuum first started. And then the second wave of those people actually arrived right after I got here. They had started another church with another jurisdiction, which kind of failed. And we got a core group of those committed people here, like almost right after I got here. What was the question again?
I was just wondering, what were they looking for in their new rector?
Yeah. So the point being, the reason why I brought up the past was that everybody was from Redeemer, and back in the day, Redeemer had a great priest who had the keys of the city. Everybody knew him, etc. And they kind of wanted that again. The church had become virtually invisible over the years, and they wanted a church that was recognized and noticed again and meaningfully engaged in the community. They were looking for a priest that was good with social media and technology. They were looking for somebody who had an evangelistic kind of fervor and a plan to grow the church. That's basically what they were looking for.
They were looking for a full-time rector. Is that right?
At the beginning, they thought they were looking for a part-time rector because they had budget constraints, which I think every church in this position has, right? You only have this much money and you want the church to grow, but you feel like you're up against the wall. Mr. McKinnon, Mike McKinnon, did a very good job at convincing them that if you really want to find somebody who's going to make a difference and who's qualified and who can achieve these things, you need to actually pay them a full-time salary, and you need to hire a full-time priest. Part-time priest is probably not going to achieve those goals. They had a little bit of money in the bank, enough to secure a decent pay for about 2 years. And so I was in a position where I was willing to take that risk. I'm pretty resourceful in that respect. So and I kind of figured that, yeah, I could probably make a big impact in 2 years if I worked hard. And that's kind of the way that shaped out.
Yeah, that's interesting because, every parish with that sort of circumstance, they can pay a guy full-time for 2 years or part-time for 4 years. And every parish has to kind of make the decision about what is in their best interest. And different contexts may vary, but you're absolutely right that if you want, a lot of those small churches are caught in a kind of catch-22 where they need someone full-time. They really need someone full-time if they're going to grow, but they're worried about whether they can find the money for somebody full-time. So, yeah.
having planted churches in the past, I know the difference between the amount of time I could spend church planting part-time and full-time. And I've actually gone, full faith, full-time, actually with, with very little support. And, there's a big difference between what you can achieve full-time and part-time.
Yeah, that's my own story, which we won't get sidetracked on, was originally planning to plant while working full time on the side, and then realizing that for me and for my family that was unsustainable and was not going to bear fruit. What did you, other than a full time salary, which is wonderful, what would you say you had to build on in the existing church, and what was the potential that you saw when you accepted their call?
Well, what we had to build on was, of course, a beautiful church building, a nice community, and a committed core. So my senior warden, the junior warden, and our treasurer at the time, as well as a couple of other people that had just come from the other church that sort of closed and joined us. These were all like, committed believers who really did want to see a change. The rest of the parish, was a mix of wonderful believers and spiky Anglicans, and that's kind of what we were. My plan was to really build around the base, basically. So what my plan was to continue to press forward the spiritual vitality of the parish while inviting new people in to surround that core. And I felt that with the right language and the right presentation, that the people that we would be inviting in or evangelizing would be people who had spiritual vigor and enthusiasm and wanted to grow in Christ. And this is what happened, actually. So, as people came into the parish, they weren't just merely looking for a 1928 prayer book parish. In fact, none of them were looking for that, virtually. Only a small number of them. But it was just people who really were looking for faithful biblical preaching, a vital church, a church that was preaching the scriptures, etc. So,
in sort of casting that vision, did you find it difficult to get on the same page in your parish, or was it fairly simple and straightforward, or what did that look like?
well, get on the same page with whom? Like the core group, the team, or the rest of the parish?
Yeah, I guess both, or rather one and then the other, if that makes sense.
Well, as far as the team goes, I had a pretty aggressive plan, and in fact, my senior warden said after the first year, he said, "Father, you're like a farmer who's gone out into the field and set all the hay bales on fire." And I said, "That's right. I just want to see what's going to burn." And that was part of the plan, right? To spin up ministries pretty quickly. We started men's breakfast, and we started Bible study, and we did reboot combat recovery, and we did this and we did that. We did a lot of activities. I really worked hard for those first few years. Not that I'm not working hard now, but I really did press quite hard. But they were fully on board with that. One of the things that I did was I did a strategic change. I created what's called a rector's council, what I call a rector's council. And I actually borrowed this from another jurisdiction. So I brought into my confidence the senior warden, the junior warden, and the treasurer, and one other person. And it still exists today, and it may not be that group, but these were people that I knew I could trust, that had the best interest of the church on board, that had vital spirituality, etc. And what we did was I was able to bring ideas out to them and get feedback and get their support. And then we could go as a group, and those were all vestrymen. And then we could go and present that to the vestry. And having already discussed it somewhat, it wasn't to get the vestry to rubber stamp it, but, some of these conversations, if you were to bring them up in a vestry, your typical vestry, you could really get lost in the sauce and end up discussing details and get hung up on this and that for 3 vestry meetings, which could be, if it's once a month, 3 months, that can really delay things. So by having this rector's council, I was able to fast track change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I do also think, vestries vary in every parish, but that is sort of can be one of the puzzles, is how to get your vestry behind you and
Yeah.
moving quickly, in particular speed. The church, in any context, the church has a hard time moving quickly, and vestries can be, they're indispensable, but they can slow things up. So yeah, how did you start? What was you got your parish council, you have your kind of set of ideas, and the you start starting up ministries, but how would you sort of, thinking sequentially, how did you start, and what were the sort of steps that you took?
So the first thing that I did within 2 weeks of my arrival is I completely revamped the website of the church. It was not good. Um, and then I did that again a year later, just so you know. You know, to make sure that your website works, you have to have results. So if you don't have people visiting your church from your website, the days of the yellow pages are gone. Nobody opens up a yellow pages to find your church, right? The front door of the church is your website, not the front door. And so if that website is not drawing people to your church or getting phone calls or something, it doesn't work. Trash it, start again, remake it, look at what works elsewhere or nearby, and work with that. But so that's the first thing I did. The next thing I did was I needed to make the church um, uh, appear, because again, my goal was growth as quickly as possible while I was also investing in spiritual vitality. So I was doing both of these things at the same time. My sermons on Sunday, and were all about spiritual vitality, praying, etc. And then I was reaching out to the outside community. On the spiritual vitality side, one of the things that I explained was, great, everybody formed this parish over the 1928 prayer book. How many of you actually use it in your daily lives? Oh, very few, actually, almost none, right? So the first challenge was, are we going to pray? Are we going to be faithful in coming to church? So it was that kind of ramping up the spiritual vitality. One of the first things that I did was I started having what I call reform seminars, RE, the number 4M, clever little graphic, right? I like things like that. I like naming things, but that's what gets people's attention, right? And so I would do Saturday seminars on a particular topic, whether it was scripture, how to read scripture, or prayer. I did several of them on prayer. I can become a PowerPoint fiend, with 72 PowerPoint slides. So there's a lot of content, but so I was doing that. The next thing that we did very early on is we started a men's breakfast. We got word that a local soup kitchen was looking for people to help serve. I immediately garnered some support for that, so we started doing that. And we started having a Bible study. So all within the first year, there was a website remake, there was spiritual vitality coming from the pulpit, there was a Bible study, there was men's breakfast, etc. By the second year, we wanted to really reach out into the community in a way that was meaningful. We have a lot of veterans in the community and a lot of veteran interest and sympathy. And so I started praying about that. And one of the things that came across my desk was Reboot Combat Recovery. And recovery ministry is kind of in my bailiwick. Counseling, I'm a certified spiritual director. And I've been, I was a missionary in Amsterdam many, many years ago. So I'm very familiar with all of those things. And I have an addiction history myself. So it made sense for us to do that. We did that as well. That garnered a lot of public support. And you got public support when someone in a pickup truck shows up at your church and hands you $500 saying, hey, I really like what you're doing. This is for the program that you're doing. So that's just kind of an example of some of the things that we did early on. And now, instead of Reboot, we do the Deep Recovery course, which is a course that I authored.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A lot of great detail in there. Just a couple comments. One is, I thoroughly applaud the website revamp. I think that is critical. When people ask me about churches to attend in an area. Hey, I'm going to be in this area. I will always pull up a website first. And even for me, that is a big determinant, not because I think the website is always definitive of what the parish is, but I know that among my friends, particularly folks who are millennials or Gen X and younger in particular, they're just not going to attend a church that has a website. One time I picked up, I was pulling one up. This was probably in about 2019. And it said, in the front page of the website said, services canceled on Sunday, March 13th, 2006. And it was just immediately, nope, not even going to mention that church exists. So I think that's really important as a basic way of building credibility. And in the same way that you want a beautiful church to invite people into, like you said, your front porch, your front door is your website, and beauty really matters. It's also, it can be extremely daunting for a lot of people, but it's not hard to find really reasonably priced folks who can build you a good website. So when we're going to post this on the Continuing Forward website, if you mention in the comments there, we can connect you with people who can do it for you if you're interested in that.
Yeah, we also have I did some presentations on website stuff and that whole end of church growth or evangelism. And as a resource on the ACA page, you can actually find those PowerPoint presentations there if people ever want to refer to that. So it's actually out there.
Yeah, and there are a lot of platforms that make it fairly easy to maintain your website yourself. So it's not as daunting as it can seem. The other two things, just really briefly, is that combination of internal community and external facing ministries. We've talked about this in different contexts before, that you have to be growing in health as a community together, and you also have to be growing in your outreach externally, and both of those work together to form a really healthy parish. One of the things for St. Dunstan's, I've been traveling a lot, visiting different parishes. And one of the things that is just so quickly apparent when you're a visitor is not even necessarily how welcoming they are to you, although that is obviously really important, but how, to the extent to which the people there like to be around each other.
Yeah.
And if they seem to enjoy being around each other, even if they're not the most hospitable, welcoming group, it makes you want to come back. Yes. And if they don't seem to want to be around each other, then you don't want to come back. And so I think whatever you could do to cultivate that community and love for one another, like a men's breakfast, is really, really valuable.
Yeah.
So I got first year website, reforms seminars, and men's breakfast. Second year, the reboot, which has since become Deep Recovery. What were your next steps?
Well, I just want to comment on something that you just said, and it kind of ties with this. One of the things, because this is, New Hampshire is like the second least churched state in the country. And so, as an aside, when people say, oh, it's so hard here, it's so hard there, I'm like, I'm in the second least church state. Okay. I doubled the size of the parish in, a few years. So this can be done. Yes, there are obstacles, but one of the things that we had to contend with was, what I called back then brand damage. In other words, the whole idea of the church that, there's a huge credibility gap. And one of the reasons why we wanted to spin up these ministries was to create credibility. And all of that activity could go on the website. So when people looked at our website, they would see that we're an active church. We're doing more than just having, collecting cans of food on Sunday, which is great. But if that's your only ministry, you have to find something that's connecting with the community in a meaningful way, right? What is the real need? What are the felt needs of the community? And how can you answer that according to the charismata or the gifts of your parish? My gifts lie in that area. Other pastors are going to have different gifts, right? And but to find where your charisma and the needs of the community come together, that's where you want to be active, right? So what was your question again?
Just in terms of after, maybe in or after your second year, having started Reboot, where did things go from there?
Okay, so we did Reboot for a couple of years, but Reboot, I didn't write that program. That program really came out from the South, from some other folks. And again, I'm in the Northeast. It is a lot more secular, frankly. I mean, what we do have are independent Christians that are in the woodwork, that have just been disenfranchised. And so they're not going to churches. I think that there are a lot of people like that. But what we did was we realized that there were people who wanted to attend Reboot, who had trauma issues, but they were not veterans. And I had already done one of the Reform seminars on Christian healing. And now I taught that, from a very Eastern Orthodox perspective, drawing on Eastern Orthodox ascetical spirituality. And so what I did was I wrote the Deep Recovery course, which is this. And that course draws together, some principles of ascetical theology, psychology, and neurobiology, to help people overcome life-controlling problems. So that became it. Now, here's the thing. These programs that we did actually brought people into our parish. Because what ended up happening is they would come and do the course. Now, people will come and do the Deep Recovery course 3, 4, 5 times. Like they'll keep coming back over and over again because it's very, very deep. And there's always something new to learn from it. But what happens is they'll go through it and then they begin to ask questions about their own faith formation and what's lacking and where they should go from there. And we don't tell them what church to go to. That's a different program, right? Deep Recovery is just, this is us helping you deal with this, your issues. But what happens is they eventually ask questions, and then they'll have a pastoral meeting with me, and then the next thing you know, they'll be coming to church. We've gained several members like that.
That's great. I'm going to read, Cameron's about to leave. Mentions he's a cradle Anglican in the continuum of Gen Z. And he says, this last Lent we prayed to minister to the unchurched. And then we started a youth ministry, which got many unchurched youth, which meets every Friday, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. We start with a heavily modified Vespers for the sake of catechizing them. And then after that short session, we go into Just Fun at around 7 p.m. to the end, which is how we get more secular youth to step inside a church. I was going to say too that, I couldn't host a Deep Recovery course. And I think one of the things that, again, we're thinking of this as a case study. And so the applicational thing is to think about what are your strengths and what are the strengths of your parish in terms of ministry and outreach. So at St. Albans in Florida, which is where I was for 3 years prior to taking the position at St. Dunstan's, they have a parishioner who's really well regarded in the classical school movement, and he helped start a series actually of classical schools, the first one being hosted at the parish, which has indirectly, well, both directly and indirectly, but almost more indirectly than directly led to church growth, precisely because it does just what Father Matt was saying, is it tells the community that this is a parish that is alive and vibrant, and it's thinking about ministry outside of its own services on Sunday. And so I think that's important to think about how it is that you can be active and engaged, and how you can show folks that you are, of course, the summit of community together is the Sunday Holy Communion, the parish communion. And yet that ought to be playing itself out in ministry and in community as well. And so it's good to see how your parish was doing that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or anything else, Father.
Well, you had asked about gifts or other strengths of the parish. You might not, someone like yourself might not feel equipped to run the Deep Recovery course. But if that's an issue, I mean, the reality is this course actually targets mental health and addiction issues. So, and that's virtually everywhere. Right now, I'm running an 8-week leaders training course so that we can train people to do it elsewhere. We have a hub kind of down in Charleston, et cetera. And I can help people do that if there's other people in a parish that feel equipped and called to do something like that. But I would say that the other things that we had going for us that were strong was that, our core, we're happy. These were very agreeable personalities. When you came through the door, you were greeted with a smile. We have a very upbeat, happy, my deacon likes to say, we're a happy church. People are going to come in and you're going to find a lot of people who are smiling and cajoling. After service, we have two services on a Sunday, an 8 o'clock and a 10:30. After our 10:30 service, we have a hospitality hour. So there's food downstairs. We invite everybody to come down. When there are new visitors, we have a little visitor card that we ask them to fill out. So this way we have their information. We can follow up with them. We can put them on our mailing list, etc., our email list. So I think that that's one of the big things, is that when people come in, they find a very joyful community. I'm kind of an upbeat personality. I like to cajole with people. We have other people that are very much the same way. And, maybe some of that is personality. I think churches are, can vary like that. But it certainly helps when people walk in and they go and they say, and people have said this to us, my gosh, I felt so warmly received right from the first time I walked through the door. And of course, we have greeters and we have seaters and ushers. So we do greet people at the door. We give them a service outline and bulletin. We show them where to sit. We have somebody who asks them, are you familiar with the service? If they're not, that person might sit with them, or we'll put a little mass guide in their hand. We'll point out to it and say, we'll be doing this and we'll be doing this. So we do a lot. We recognize that this is not a contemporary service, right? And frankly, I want there to be a culture gap. I want somebody to come through the door and encounter a different culture. To me, it's you're experiencing the culture of heaven, as opposed to, the profane culture outside. There should be culture shock, right? And we want to help people over that culture shock, which, if you know anything about that, that lasts 9 to 14 months. So people will come to your church from another background. It's going to take them that long before they really continue their transition from, Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever to, hey, like, this is it, I'm in. So I think that would be one of the big things is, just that kind of very warm, that's a strength. And I think that, I take preaching very seriously. I don't, I spend hours preparing sermons usually. So, I don't think it's if I could say this, I don't think it's a good practice to spend 15 minutes preparing a sermon and preach from, the seat of your pants. I don't think that produces, we're in a very competitive environment, church environment. And what I tell people is, we have to work twice as hard for half the results that you'd have in 1974 or 1982. So that means you have to work harder on your sermon, make sure it's good, make it count. Those are some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's great. My first experience in the Anglican Church was not very good preaching, but I was drawn in because of pastoral care and also because of just the sheer beauty of the liturgy. And I had to learn, or I learned later, that you can have all of those things and great preaching as well, and that the ministry of the word and preaching is critical as well. I think thinking about the warmth of your parish, there's always, I think in Christian worship, there's supposed to be a kind of reverential joy, and different traditions and different parishes will sort of default to more in one direction than the other. Some places will be so full of joy that you don't seem to sense a lot of reverence, if you will. I think that in our tradition, there tends to be a strong emphasis on reverence, which is my inclination as well, but it can't eliminate joy. And I think Bishop Grundorf, the retired bishop of the APA, presiding bishop, I think he was the one that said something to the effect that, if you're going to have a solemn and reverential service, then you need to have a joyful and exuberant coffee hour.
Yes.
So you have to have that space to welcome people. Even though the whole purpose is to worship God, not to glad hand one another, you have to show that the worship of God overflows in a community that's united in joy.
Yeah, I think that, I guess the way I approach the liturgy, and boy, have I gone through a couple of different iterations, because I was in the CEC for a while in the Episcopal Church, which was, very low church. The parish that I came to faith in was St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Darien under Terry Fulham. So if anybody's read The Miracle of Darien, that's where I come from. I also had a flirt with the Antiochian Orthodox Archdiocese. So, a couple of different liturgical influences there. But, what I try to do is I just, my approach is simply that, it needs to be reverential and holy and beautiful, but it also needs to breathe. And so if we're too rigid, the liturgy doesn't get to breathe. We don't get to breathe, and we don't get to experience the presence of God. And the other thing that I would say too is we need to put it in Pentecostal language, we need to be prayed up. To do the liturgy, so when I teach people to pray, and I put a lot of emphasis on that, we spend a lot of time talking about prayer in the parish. So, when I talk about prayer, I want people to learn how to pray the daily office, or else most people are not even ready for that. About as much as they could do is the prayers for families and individuals in the back of the prayer book, which is fine, right? But I also try to encourage them to learn how to pray extemporaneously and pray what I like to say is, the unprocessed content of their heart or their emotional life. That's just one way to put it, kind of as a spiritual director, I might put it that way. Like, how do you pray the content of your emotional life? Most people don't know how to do that, but that creates an opening for us to have a real dialogue with God. Well, anyway, so, I try to spend time, in my prayer schedule, not just praying the daily office, but at least once a week, usually twice a week, I have time for extended prayer where I might spend, I don't want to, I'll spend more time, much more time than that, in prayer, praying for the parish, not just going down the list of names, but praying for insight, praying for wisdom. And I think that translates when we do the liturgy. If we're prayerful, you can hear that, and you can feel that in the liturgy. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything that you could offer, or anything more recently in the parish that you've done? I'm just thinking about as you've had this successful growth, how do you continue to challenge your parish, not to maybe be complacent, but to continue to grow in holiness and to grow in mission?
Ooh, good point. Well, over the years, of course, we have added some other things from time to time. So I should mention, what a great team we have. We have a great choir director, Carlos Martinez, and he's a professional. He was a professional opera player. We really leveraged that early on. I made an argument to our vestry, I think it was my second year, that we needed to invest money in our choir because we had a diminished choir, right? People were aging out, etc. So this is in my second year. I started saying, look, people um, people love good music. It doesn't have to be contemporary music. People love good music. And so we actually hired a couple of other college students to sing with our choir, a couple of ringers, kind of, so that we elevated the entire level of our musical program by investing in it, with the argument that people will come for good music. And that's exactly what happened. People came for good music. There's no place in our region within an hour that does music the way we do that here. And it's traditional music. And I tell people, I'm not committed to traditional worship because I'm a fuddy-duddy. I believe that it's a pastoral answer to a profane culture, right? So we want to do something different. That's kind of why we're doing that. But we did invest in that. My position, I had my own business for some years too. You have to invest forward to build your business, right? That means that you have to take your pocket out and make an investment and take a risk in order to see return. but the return is what builds your business, right? It's kind of the same problem. You have to think a little bit about that when you're building your church. So I think that would be, I would be remiss if I left that out. What we continue to do, to make sure that we're not resting on our laurels, is I just keep on talking about prayer. Over and over and over and over and over again. I highly leverage Lent. And the penitential nature of Lent. So, I'm one of these crazy people who actually like Lent. And so, to encourage people to make a confession, to at least one yearly confession, if that's all you can manage. But that, and to rededicate themselves to prayer, and to encourage people to, stay on top of your spirituality. Your spirituality wants to bleed out and wane. You get concerned about the world and the things that draw you away from Christ. You need to come back and refocus on that. I think that that's important. Of course, the other thing, we had the big C word over the last 3 years. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. C19. All right, so we had to deal with that as well. Fortunately, we were not in a state that was as closed down as some other places. But of course, it was an issue. But we were very aggressive in opening the doors as quickly as possible, maintaining a presence, staying open. We stayed open, even though we were only allowed to meet with 10 people that first year. And we just found, I invested in, like you could watch our service on Sunday. We'd already been doing that, but we invested in other material. So we having come from a church planting background, I know what attrition feels like and how hard it is to recover from that. So when I looked at that set of circumstances, and I think this translates to any church that's experiencing attrition, that there's a great little book called The Dip. You should find out. But the deeper the trough, the exponentially more energy it takes to come out of it. So if the lower your church is in that dip, the more energy and resources it's going to take to come out. You need to intervene in that as early as possible. Having experienced that as a church planter, I know what it's like to have a church plant with 40 or 60 people and then hit a really bad set of circumstances, because church plants are very vulnerable, and then start again with 14. That's hard, right? That's really hard. And the amount of energy that it takes to come back out of that is a lot. So I knew that in that, the last 3 years when that first started happening, I couldn't allow the church to attrit like that. And so I did everything I could to make sure that we still had some kind of momentum or something to perpetuate, so that we could recover as quickly as possible. And we did. We really covered well. In fact, we gained people through that period of time.
Yeah, that's great. Just take a couple, maybe a few minutes just to summarize your take-home message, or your principles, or the kind of the context and the particulars are always going to be different, but there are principles that we can all apply. And while you're doing that, just invite those who are here to think about questions they might have, because we'll have about 10 or 12 minutes for questions afterwards.
Okay. Oh, you want me to summarize? I thought you were going to summarize.
Yes, yeah, I'm not gonna. Do you have any thoughts about just kind of the basic principles?
Basic principles, I think, really just return to a few things. It's God's church, and we don't have all the answers. And when I first came here, I was very aware that I didn't have all the answers. And so I spent a lot of time asking God for the answers. And whenever there was a problem or an issue, and some of those issues I was tempted to get involved in. I can think of one where the Lord was like, "Don't you dare touch that. You need to stay out of that, because if you become part of that problem, you're going to become the lightning rod. They're going to sort it out and it'll be fine." And that's exactly what happened. So listening to God, listening to our Lord, I think is really vital. That's probably the first thing. We can't do this without prayer and trusting the Lord. So that's really important. The second thing is, I know that we have people who are very skeptical about church growth or technology. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I think that we just have to treat them respectively. You know, in other words, you can't do all of the, you can't rely on a website if you don't have the basics of your parish down. In other words, it really will harm you, in fact, if you invest a lot of money in a website and you have 5 people and there are all sorts of other problems in that little nucleus of a church. It's not ready for prime time yet. So you have to ask questions, is my parish ready for this amount of exposure? What do we have to do to get there? I would suggest people, and in this respect, it's like, especially if you have a very small church, my opinion, not everybody agrees with me, but my opinion is that's very much like a church planting situation. Your small group becomes really your church planting core, and then you restart your efforts. It may be more like a church relaunch or something like that. And when you relaunch a parish, sometimes you even have to change the name. If it's been there for a very long period of time, and you've been very small for a very long period of time, you might need to think differently about how you're approaching that. But I do believe in leveraging media and social media to be seen and noticed. People for many years now live in the cocoon of their home and their small number of relationships, and to break into that, we have a wonderful means to do that. It's the computer, but you can't rely on that. So I think that that's important. And I think that overcoming the credibility gap, whatever that might be in your area, maybe there is no credibility gap, but being meaningfully engaged in the community, I think, is another thing. Like, be outward focused. Have some kind of outreach energy and effort that can be noticed and not just disappear. I want to be noticed. When we came to the parish and we started doing this, it was like, how can we be noticed? And that's why we chose to do some of the things that we've done.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think just one comment on social media and the internet and everything. I think, we have to view them as tools to reach people, but specifically to draw them into the church and into community. Whereas rather than letting them be a replacement for community. And I think it's important to always remember that that is how they are designed. They are designed to replace human community. And that's what, if you just look sort of at the big picture, that's what they've done over the last 10, 15 years. But that doesn't mean that you can't use them wisely, counterintuitively, and really even against their design. You just have to be thoughtful about it. How is this thing that I'm doing going to help draw people into my church, and make sure that you're not allowing your own parishioners to replace church with online sources. So yeah, I think you're spot on with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing, all of us need to bring younger people into the parish, into the church. At the outset, I said our average age was probably in the early 70s, late 60s at the best, and it's dropped to the 40s. Right. So, we just had, like 4 new births here. We have young families. Well, guess what? They're very familiar with digital life. And so, they're going to access that technology to get to know us and to get to know our parish. At the same time, those who are going to be, especially those who are attracted to our parishes, they're looking for meaningful engagement and relationship with people. They're looking for spiritual mothers and fathers. They're looking for authenticity, right? And so, all we're doing is we're just using a tool, right? To invite people into the community so that they can have those relationships. I mean, I think that's why it's important. It's not everything. It's just one thing that we can use.
Yeah, that's great. Any questions? You can either just unmute yourselves and ask them, or you can type them in the chat and I'll read them out.
I did have a question. You were talking about the programs that you offer to the community, like the Reboot, how did you promote those? How did you let people in the community know that those were available?
Well, when we first did Reboot, we actually had an article written about us in the local paper, but most of it, I actually leveraged Facebook advertising to get it out there. And we do that a lot. I've used that quite a bit. I promote our services and our events through that. We have a yearly performance of Handel's Messiah, and we promote it that way. And we sell out, we pack our church when we do that. And so, that's probably one of the major ways that we do that. I'm pretty computer savvy and internet savvy and stuff like that. So I did things to really kind of nail down our SEO at the very beginning, so that, if you do a search for a church or an Anglican church anywhere in this state, our church is going to show up probably on the first page. And then there are events listed there on our first page. So if anybody has any curiosity about us, they're going to see right there on the first page, there's a special little section, upcoming events. So those are principally the ways that we do that. We don't rely on newspapers. Nobody who reads newspapers. Nobody.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that is that using Facebook, et cetera, specifically for events that are unusual or that are likely to reach beyond the people who are already there. Because it is, on the one hand, you want people who don't know you exist to know that you exist. But just advertising your Sunday service is not a bad thing for that purpose. But your most effective things are going to be when you do something a little bit unusual.
Yes.
St. Paul's, Melbourne, if I'm remembering, they did some kind of a cookout, and were sort of overwhelmed by the response they got through Facebook advertising, which is, again, one tool, and it's not going to be. We actually didn't have great success down at St. Albans and Oviedo with Facebook, and I think that's because we didn't figure out that sort of how can we reach out to people for things that are unique, that will draw attention. Our ads would get lots of digital response, but that did not communicate. That didn't translate into people showing up. So you do have to be sort of careful and thoughtful. And SEO, by the way, is search engine optimization, for those of you who are wondering. But you might have figured that out from his answer as well.
Yeah. So we don't promote our Sunday services with any of those things. We just rely on the fact that, I know that the website is good. It's effective. We have a regular stream of visitors, and people remark about the website, and we only promote special events, through Facebook Market, whatever it is, those things.
And I know that this is really obvious, but make sure that your website and your Facebook, if you have one, have accurate and updated service times. Because I've been to a couple where, as I'm going to visit a parish, try to find, and even some that have really beautiful rebooted, revamped websites, somehow that slipped through. So I know they have services on Sunday, or I assume, but I have no idea when they are. So you got to make sure that you have that sort of basic information there.
Yeah,
and contact information. Just think about somebody who wants to know about your service, about your church. What are the sort of limited things they would want to know, and let them know that. And ideally with really good high quality pictures of your church and your things and your people, not generic stuff.
Photos of your people, not your chalice and your pews. I find oftentimes there are photos of all of the liturgical items and the church itself. People want to see people. They connect with people. So
yeah, and I don't think it's bad to have those things, but they probably shouldn't be the first or even the second thing that you're showing off. Maybe the third thing. It is really, I think people are attracted to beauty, so it's not a bad thing. But a picture of an empty, beautiful church is actually pretty counterproductive if that's the only thing that you've got.
Right.
Any other questions?
I have another one. Do you have like a process for how you engage with visitors? So say I'm a visitor that comes to your parish on a Sunday, what happens when the service is over?
What happens when the service is over is if we see visitors, we invite them to fill out a visitor card. After they've filled out a visitor card, it goes to our church administrator. She enters it into our online database. We use something called Breeze. That gives all of us access to this. It's out on the cloud. It's not residing in the computer. And we can do a lot with that piece of software, by the way. We can create polls and all sorts of things with that, and registration forms. We receive donations through that. So it goes to there. Then we start emailing them. On that card, it says, would you like a pastoral visit, et cetera, et cetera. And we pay attention to those things. In best case scenario, I'm usually calling those people or connecting with them within a few days. Excuse me. But that's what our goal is. But there's always, we're trying to maintain contact. The next thing that happens is when someone comes and visits the church, and they have shown up now for a little while. So they visited 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I'll have lunch with them. So I want to sit down with them and I want to get to know them. They feel good when they're like, wow, that pastor took time out of his life to have lunch with me, and I only just started attending the parish. So we do that, and then usually what happens is they become regular attenders, and then we invite them to do an inquirer's course. And recently, I just created a whole inquirer's course for new members, and I think it's very important for people to go through a process like that. The assumption, we get so happy that people have come to attend our church that we just assume that they're well catechized Christians and that we let them become members and members of the vestry. But most of them are very poorly catechized, right? So this becomes our catechesis, our process here, and they're introduced to the Anglican faith, how our church works, the creeds, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, we invite them to become members, and usually they become members. That's kind of what that process works like. And I mentioned before the fact that we have greeters and ushers and things like that.
Right. And on that note, I would say it's really important that you have a few people, at least, that are empowered and, if need be, sort of even trained in a very minimal way to be friendly but not desperate, but to learn how to sort of, be just engage with people. And those people you should handpick, and they should also be, this takes a lot of pastoral sensitivity, but they should be empowered to intervene if somebody else happens to be sort of cornering a new person, and that person may not be giving the best first impression. I think about this myself when I was in college visiting some Anglican churches one time, literally cornered in the corner of the sort of parish hall in the coffee hour by a very crazy old man. And I could see some people nervously looking over because I was a visitor and they knew this guy was crazy. This is me assuming. But nobody came in and got me out of the corner. And eventually I literally had to brush past him. Well, thank you very much. And then brush past him to get out, fled out of the church. I was in grad school, actually, not college. And I never came back. Now, I later connected with folks in that church, and it was actually a really solid church, but nobody, including the rector, nobody rescued me from being cornered by the very strange, very irrationally angry old guy. So that's a sort of really important, people who both run interference, but also, and again, you have to be friendly and warm without getting to the new person, grab them and drag them. You want to be really friendly and outgoing and even assertive, but stopping short of desperate. Final questions?
I have one. Hi, Father Mark. How are you?
Hi, Alan. It's good to see you.
Bart's doing well.
Yeah.
Good. Is that your question?
No, that was just a comment.
Okay.
I just wanted to say hi. But
yeah, good to see you.
Actually, I do have a question, and one of the questions that I face is there are so many pop-up churches around, and people get burned. They go to a church and they're all into the the gospel band on stage and stuff, and then they shut down and they feel like they've been burned. And it's very hard when you're talking to someone to try to re-invite them into, or at least re-spiritualize them in some way, that they do want to attend church because they've been burned. I'm not sure how to do that, but as Father Mirabile said, it's a very unchurched state. And I think once you've kind of burned them, I don't know how you attract them to the Anglican faith at that point.
Well, you know, they have to go through their process.
Yeah.
You know, as a spiritual director and as a pastor, really all I want to do is I want to listen. I want to sympathize. I want to listen to their story and learn what happened, right? And you know, grieve with them as well, because the fact is that hurts, right? So I take people's pain seriously.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to gloss over that and go, well, you know, that's just them. And you don't want to throw the church under the bus or anything. You know, you don't need to do any of that stuff. What you need to do is listen to them and understand them. And, you know, we re-evangelize people by loving them.
Yeah. Well,
right?
You're in a unique position because just down the road from you was a large church. And I think a lot of those people are feeling a little burned.
Yeah, what you're talking about.
And I hope that they can come back to a church, but I think some of them may never set foot in a
well,
church
that's
again.
Not true. And actually,
well,
in our last deep recovery course, we actually had a few of them.
Oh, good.
One of the things that course mentions and deals with is religious trauma. And so they've come and attended, and one of them has already become, you know, gone through our Inquirers course.
Good.
Has
Good
begun
to hear.
attending, and the others, you know, are here weekly for our deep recovery support group. So, you know, I think that, and this kind of dovetails to the very difficult conditions that we're living in, and the emotional chaos and despair that people are going through right now. And that's pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that people are not used to thinking of the church in those terms, and many churches don't even deal with that stuff anymore. But I think that there's a real opportunity there. We just have to, you know, I'm pretty jealous for bringing soul care back into the church rather than outsourcing it to, you know, therapists. And so I think that we need to learn how to do this better. And if we do that, you know, we can bring healing to a lot of people.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. One thing I'll just say real quickly is we had on a probably very different circumstances, but both here I'm in All Saints Charlottesville, where I'm assisting right now as St. Dunstan's gets off the ground, and down at St. Albans in Oviedo. We had in very different circumstances people come to us after having been burned by kind of big box entrepreneurial church type situations. And for both sets of folks, when I would ask them, hey, how come you ended up staying here? In one case, we had a family visit, disappear for 6 weeks, and then come back, and they've never left. They've been here ever since. And in all those cases, everyone I talked to said there were two things. One, people were warm and friendly and liked being around each other, and there was a sense of genuine community. But two, and again, this is specific to their context, not their own background. There was actually the consistency, the stability of the liturgy was valuable for them, because they were tired of invent a new church every week kind of thing. And of course, the other side of it is that you can get stale and dead, but there is a real sense that this is, and that was part of it for me when I came out of the Baptist tradition. This was something stable. I knew that next Sunday we were going to be worshiping God in a consistent way. I wasn't going to be surprised by, you know, anything too wild. And so we can kind of lean into that identity, even as we make sure that we're being joyful and in the right ways and have a great community.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Father Matt. That was really wonderful, really great to hear a case study, encouraging to hear a study of revitalization, particularly one happening in the Northeast, where, you know, it can be a lot harder going, but you know, as you've shown, that doesn't make it an impossible task. Thank you all for visiting. We will record this and we'll put it up on the Continuing Forward website at some point. Thanks again, and hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
All right. It's been a pleasure. God bless.
Bye.
Thank you.